Hello and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast. I am your host, Fabrice Nye, and joining me here in the Murrieta studios is Dr. David Burns. Hi, David.
Hi, Fabrice.
Dr. David Burns has been a pioneer in the development of cognitive therapy, and he is the creator of the new team therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 20 languages. He is an emeritus adjunct clinical professor of psychiatry at the Stanford University School of Medicine. Welcome to episode 109 of the Feeling Good podcast. I want to, in advance, apologize to our listeners. We still have some background noise here with some construction. I hope that won't be too detrimental to the sound quality, but we'll do our best. And before we get into our topic, David, you wanted to mention some upcoming workshops?
Yes. On October 28th, I'm going to do a one-day workshop with Jill Levitt from the Feeling Good Institute. It'll be live in Palo Alto if you want to attend live, and it's also going to be streamed on the internet, so you can join from anywhere in the world. It'll be from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., and it's going to be team CBT methods for the treatment of relationship difficulties, step-by-step training for therapists. Uh-huh. When I teach with Jill, it's generally a pretty fantastic experience. I'm not blowing my own horn here so much as Jill. She's just a fabulous teacher.
No, I agree.
Yeah, and we've got great chemistry. So I think that'll be a wonderful event. And to register, go to the www.feelinggoodinstitute, one word, feelinggoodinstitute.com, and you can register there, or you go ahead.
And that's October 28th, 2018, right?
Yes, and that'll be a Sunday, a full day on a Sunday. Or you can call them 650-353-6544. That's 650-353-6544. If you're a therapist, you get 6 continuing education credits. It's $135, and it's going to be fun. Another one coming up is in Southern California on November 1 and 2, 2018, Woodland Hills, California. That's a 2-day workshop sponsored by iahb.org, or call 800-258-8411. And that's rapid recovery from trauma, a 2-day workshop. And then on the evening of day 1 of November 1st, that's November 1 to Woodland Hills, the evening of November 1, I'll do a live therapy demonstration from 6 to 8:30 with a volunteer from the audience who's struggling with depression and anxiety, and probably we'll get someone who's experienced trauma, and you'll be able to witness live these new high-speed treatment techniques.
Yeah.
And then finally, on November 29 and 30th, 2018, in San Francisco, I'll be doing Treat Anxiety Fast, sponsored by PESI, P-E-S-I, and I'll be repeating that December 3-4 in Portland. And the one in Portland will also have live streaming, so you can attend from anywhere in the world. And if you're interested in that anxiety workshop, you can go to PESI online, or for registration info, or call them 800-844-8260. So
great. Thank you for these announcements.
By the way, how are you coming on this project of cross-referencing the podcast? Are people helping out with that?
Thank you for asking. Help? Yes. I had a number of people write to me about this. And what I did is I gave them 3 episodes to put some keywords in there and to summarize the episode in a very short format. It was kind of like a test to see whether people had a lot of keen insights into what were the main topics for each episode. And I had about half a dozen responses. So what I'm planning to do now is I'm going to get back to those people who sent me their submissions, and essentially, so that it's not, too much work for one person, I'm going to split it into a number of episodes and assign this to each of the people who responded. And then I'll compile this all into one big list.
That's going to be huge. It's going to be a big breakthrough. It's going to be so convenient to people because our podcasts are a rich resource, a treasure trove of great information about how team therapy works. And this will allow people to utilize it like that and as a kind of a reference thing. So when you want to hear several examples of externalization of voices, you go, right? What podcast to go to hear that?
No, absolutely. And so that's going to be really useful, especially as the number of episodes grows. The other thing is, in the list, I wanted people to give me the link to the audio file and the link to the show notes. A lot of people they seem to get lost in finding those show notes.
Well, by the way, I found a lot of people have been emailing me, people who I thought were pretty bright, saying, I don't know what a show note is.
Oh, yes.
And it's just the way I write them up on the website. It's just the write-up that goes with each podcast.
Yeah. So I hope we'll make this clearer. And so one of the people who responded to me to do the indexing, her husband is a programmer, and he wrote a program that extracted the links to the show notes and the links to the audio files and the titles automatically. So I already have that.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So people don't need to do this by hand. So all they need to do by hand is the tagging and the summary.
Wow.
So that's going to really speed up the process.
Yeah.
So thank you for all of you who volunteered. This was just fantastic. And so now it's my job to parse this out and then to put this back into an index page.
Coming up with that very simple basic idea was a stroke of genius, my good friend.
All right. So today our topic is David's top 5 techniques. And this came out of an email we got from Tanuj, who wrote, I've heard Dr. Burns mention that he's most proud of a few techniques. I believe he said 3 or 5 techniques, one of which was the disarming technique. I was wondering what the others were. Does he have a top 5 list? So today, we're going to reveal your top 5. In fact, it's more like your top 10, and I hope we can do them justice. But because they're really your I would say your favorite or preferred techniques. If people listen to prior episodes, especially when we do live sessions, they'll see that those keep coming up over and over again. So what are they? What's number 1?
Well, it was fun to make me the center of attention. Thank you for the question. And I got to thinking, what are the things in my career that I've developed that I'm the most proud of, or that I learned that were the hugest breakthroughs? And what I'd forgotten all about, was one of the biggest one, is my list of 10 cognitive distortions that I created for the book Feeling Good.
Yes.
And that's been reproduced, I would literally in hundreds of magazines. It's been talked about on over 1,000 radio shows, and now probably tens of thousands of websites are using those distortions, like all or nothing thinking, overgeneralization, emotional reasoning. And the way it came about, I'll just be real quick, but, Beck had maybe 4 distortions that they had real big complicated names to make them sound academic. And then Albert Ellis had one that he pushed a lot, should statements. And so I kind of put those together and added more to them and gave them, popular names, like all or nothing thinking, overgeneralization. I
think that Ellis went in the other direction, because those should statements, he calls that masturbation.
Yeah, masturbation and the shouldy approach
and so,
to life.
So I think that this is a little bit too tacky.
Yeah, right.
But, so you took the middle road, kind of like the Buddha,
Yeah, that's right. But the way it came about,
or Goldilocks.
I have to attribute it to one of my patients in Philadelphia. He said during I was teaching him, tell him we got these 3 or 4 or 5 distortions, and then he said to me, why don't you make a list of them for us?
Yeah.
And I said, that's a great idea. And I went home and I thought, gosh, there's really 10 of them. Some of them I created, like emotional reasoning from how you feel. I feel like a loser, so I must be a loser. And it only took about a half an hour to put it together. And then I showed it to him the next week. He said, "Oh, this is awesome." And then that's the thing that actually led to my book Feeling Good. And so I'm very, very proud of that.
I totally agree. Sometimes I've Googled the cognitive distortions, and every time what comes up is your list.
Yeah.
So, it's clear that, everyone has really taken that and run with it. By the way, you say there's 10. I would argue with you, as I'm wont to do sometimes, that you actually have 13.
That's true.
Because the jumping to conclusions is actually 2 different distortions.
That's right.
Fortune telling and mind reading.
Absolutely.
And the blame is actually 2 distortions, self-blame and other blame.
Mm-hmm. And then should statements is 2. Shoulds against the self, shoulds against others. Outward and inward shoulds.
And magnification is actually magnification and minimization. So that's 14.
14.
So,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the neat thing about them, I think why they caught on was because it's true. People can see, yes, I do think that way. And that is the cause of my depression and my anxiety. And then in addition, the fact that it's a distortion, it's not the truth about you, that you're a loser. It's just a distorted thought is so framed to people. So that would have to be up toward the top of the list. The second one that I just realized yesterday on a hike, I was talking with a fellow, he asked about some of the research that led to the development of team, and I forgot all about it, but I did research in the late 1980s on willingness. How willing are you to do psychotherapy homework? I developed a willingness scale, and I showed that it had a strong causal effect on recovery from depression.
Yeah.
And it's been replicated in 5 or 6 independent studies now, including one I published on the Stanford inpatient unit.
By the way, thank you for sending me your papers on this, because I'm going to use that as a reference for a class I'm going to give to my psychological association on the common factors of psychotherapy.
Oh, yeah. Cool. That's beautiful. And that was actually... It's the first thing, and I think still the only thing in the world literature that's been shown consistently to have a powerful causal effect on depression and recovery from depression, the whole issue of motivation and resistance. And that's what led to team therapy, which was a huge departure from cognitive therapy. I still use all of the amazing cognitive therapy techniques, but we have new techniques based on reducing and eliminating patients' resistance and boosting patients' motivation. And that's what has really led to this high-speed treatment techniques. And so that was, I think, has also been huge.
So willingness is not really a technique, but it's a concept.
That came through research. And then I saw this is absolutely true in my clinical practice. And then I showed it statistically as well and published in the top psychology research Journal of Consulting and Clinical Psychology, that practically every patient who was willing to do homework recovered.
Yeah.
And practically every patient who refused, who wasn't willing, deteriorated or dropped out of therapy. It was just a huge causal effect.
Yeah. It's isn't that what you call a mediating factor? Like, if it's there, then things will flow. If it's not, it's going to put a lock on it.
Absolutely. And then we were able to develop techniques to enhance motivation and to overcome resistance. So it's become a big breakthrough to my way of thinking in psychotherapy.
You might be happy to hear that there's a Zen Buddhist teacher, her name is Sherry Huber, who wrote a book a number of years ago called Willingness is the Key.
Oh, that's cool. And then I saw a paper that was just done on depression, on anxiety, on treatment of obsessive compulsive disorder, and they concluded that willingness is the major factor in recovery from OCD. And of course it is. Are you willing to confront your fears?
Yeah.
Whereas in depression, are you willing to do your psychotherapy homework with the daily mood log? So that's huge. And also when we have these big discoveries that we come across that we're so proud of, as you pointed out, we often find that they've been around for 100 years or 1,000 years or more. It's just often rediscovering.
Well, of course, yes.
A third one is the one this person mentioned that you know so well, the disarming technique.
That's the one that Tanuj mentioned, yes.
Yeah, and the law of opposites, and the idea that you can often put the lie to something by agreeing with it. And that if you agree with a false criticism, you'll put the lie to it. If you defend yourself, which most of us do most of the time, you'll show that the criticism is valid, and the conflict will escalate.
Yeah, I have such a hard time with this one. My clients really push back on it.
Oh, yeah. I first discovered it in one of Beck's seminars when I was first just learning cognitive therapy, and I had all of these very difficult patients, and I would present them in the seminar, and I had this patient who would call me up between sessions and say things like, I'm standing here by the phone with a gun pointed to my head, and if you don't give me electroconvulsive therapy tomorrow morning at our session, I'm going to pull the trigger right now. Stuff like that, real horrible stuff. And I would say, but I don't know how to do electroconvulsive therapy. And then he'd start screaming at me. And I said, he comes into sessions and he just screams at me, and he tells me that I'm not helping him. And I would say, which is ridiculous, and what should I do? And then Beck said, well, why don't you just agree with him? And I said, what do you mean? And Beck said, well, it sounds like you're not helping him. Why don't you just acknowledge the truth and what he was saying? So he came in the next day, and he came in and sat down and started screaming at me, saying, you're not helping me. And I said, well, I'll change his name to protect his identity, call him George. I said, George, I've been thinking about what you're saying, and it's absolutely right. And I really like you, and I feel bad that I've been missing the boat entirely. Let's talk about it. And then he just softened and opened up, and we had a tremendous course of therapy. And he recovered. He became a leader in this thing called Recovery Incorporated, which is a free self-help movement. Mm-hmm. And the odd thing, I got a telephone call from him just before I went to Philadelphia for a workshop about it, maybe a year ago. And he said, do you remember me? And it was the same guy.
Yeah.
And I said, do I remember you? And tears came to my eyes. I said, it's just like maybe a couple weeks ago, it seems like, when we were working together. He says, well, I was a pain in the ass, but you saved me, you changed my life, and I see you're coming to Philadelphia, and I just wanted to say God bless you, and to let you know what a fantastic impact you had on me. And I said, oh, hey, come to the workshop, I'll give you a free ticket. Sadly, he didn't show up at the workshop, but it was so inspiring. But that has just made a massive change in my personal life, and my therapy. It's been more than a technique. It's like a philosophy. And this has to do with the self thing, do you see, that we were talking about in the previous podcast as well. Once you realize you have no self, then you can agree easily with criticisms, because it's just some specific thing.
Yeah.
And then when you see the truth, there's always truth in criticism.
It's not about you. There's nothing personal about it,
Or even if there is something personal about it.
They cannot be, because there would have to be a self for it to be personal.
Oh, sure. But it's, I'm sorry, I keep knocking that paper against there. But yeah, it's been mind-blowing to put the lie to a criticism by finding the truth in it. The disarming technique, the most important of the 5 secrets of effective communication. Should we push on to the next one?
Yeah.
This is
number 4.
To your order, but one of the first cognitive therapy techniques I created was externalization of voices with the acceptance paradox.
And I want to say that I see this as your number 1 technique. Because
it is.
I noticed that in nearly every single live session that you've done, you've used it in some fashion.
Absolutely. And I would say of all the minutes I spent in my career, I would say I spent 40% of all the minutes I spent doing therapy and still doing externalization of voices. And for listeners who don't know what it is, it's a kind of a role play technique where the patient and I become the same person. We both have the same name. Like if you and I were doing it, you'd be the Fabrice and I'm Fabrice. And then I know what the patient's negative thoughts are because they're written down on the daily mood log. And then I verbalize the patient's negative thoughts to the patient using the second person you. Like if you have the thought, I'm a loser, I would say, Fabrice, because you got divorced, let's say you were thinking that makes you a loser. I'd say, Fabrice, you know that you were divorced, so therefore you're a loser. And then Fabrice, you would take the positive self-loving role and dispute my attack either with self-defense or with the acceptance paradox. And then we do role reversals until we totally blew that thought out of the water.
If people go back to episode 34, this is the live session with Mark. This is one of the live sessions that we've split into different segments.
Oh.
And that episode is the application of the externalization of voices. So,
yes.
So it'd be a good example for people to listen to.
That's right. And if you listen to that episode with Mark and want to have a follow-up because he thought he was a failure as a father and couldn't connect with his older son. And we never got follow-up on it. And so I asked him about it recently. And I don't know if he told me in a phone call or in an email, but he said that session just had a mind-blowing effect on him. And after that, he started using his 5 secrets with the son that he thought he couldn't connect with. Yeah. And he said it just turned into a wonderful relationship.
Yeah.
And I think also the disarming technique was one of the methods he used in communicating with the son he couldn't get close to. Mm-hmm. But anyway, externalization of voices and acceptance paradox. Another thing I've been very, very key was the uncovering techniques, the development of the individual downward arrow and the interpersonal downward arrow, where you get at the patient's self-defeating beliefs like the approval addiction, the achievement addiction, perfectionism, and entitlement, the brush fire fallacy, things like that, the core beliefs that cognitive therapists think give rise to depression and anxiety in the first place.
Yeah. I heard of a technique, a cognitive technique that some people use called the vertical descent. Is that the same as the downward arrow?
Yeah, I imagine they probably just took my technique and gave it a new name.
Okay.
That happens so much in our field. People steal from others, give it their own name, and pretend like they created it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's the vertical descent into the depth of the
into
mind.
the depth, yeah.
And it's a very high-speed way at getting at the beliefs under the surface. And then another one that I'm very proud of.
So number 6, now we're on 6.
Yeah, is the hidden emotion technique.
Which is also an uncovering technique.
Yes, that's right. And it's kind of based a little bit on psychoanalytic thinking, but the idea that most anxious patients, I've just used this technique as recently as this Tuesday in the Tuesday group, the idea that some people are very nice, overly nice, and they're the ones who tend to get anxiety disorders.
Yeah.
And that they focus on a symptom, like panic attacks or a phobia or whatever it is, but there's something bugging them that's bothering them in the here and now. But they are not aware of it because they're so nice. They're angry with someone or they're upset about something in their life. And if you can help them bring that repressed or suppressed problem to conscious awareness, often the anxiety will suddenly disappear. They have to bring it to conscious awareness and solve the problem that they're avoiding. But that has been a huge development. Yeah. Cognitive therapy is good for anxiety. Exposure and response prevention are good for anxiety. But this is an entirely different, powerful tool.
And I will point people back to the episode 27. in the Scared Stiff series, which is about the hidden emotion. Yeah, so I hope people can go and look back at those hidden emotion episodes.
Yeah. Now there's several more. I think another huge one has been the development of the feared fantasy technique, which is also combined with the acceptance paradox. That's something that I use all the time, and maybe we don't.
Well, we did the demo a few episodes ago of the feared fantasy. Yeah.
And then I think another huge one is developing the experimental technique for panic disorder. Beck had created the concept of patients doing experiments, and then it occurred to me, that if a patient is having a panic attack and thinking I'm about to die of a heart attack, they can do an experiment to test it. Now they're terrified. You have to push them to do it, but you can have them do jumping jacks and try to bring on a heart attack, which seems extreme, and a lot of therapists are afraid to do it. But what happens is they find out that they are not going to have a heart attack. They can do jumping jacks, and that it was a complete distortion, and you get like a 1-session cure for panic disorder. And then the panic attack patients, some others have the thought during a panic attack, I'm going to go crazy, I'm going to become psychotic and lose my mind. And so again, you can have them do an experiment, induce a panic attack, and then have them try to go crazy, which of course terrifies them. You can have them roll around on the floor and scream and talk in tongues and try hard to become psychotic, and they discover that they can't, no matter how hard they try. And again, you can see a 1-session cure for panic attack.
And that's even if they are not having a panic attack in your office.
Yeah, you can have them just try to go crazy in the office. As long as it terrifies them, it will be effective. Or you can have them do these things when they get a natural panic attack at home. Another thing,
I don't even know what jumping jacks are.
You don't? Well, you go like this, jumping up and down.
Like you clap your hands?
Yeah. You jump,
Okay.
or any strenuous exercise, running in place, running up and down stairs, running around the block.
Yeah.
Another thing that occurred to me.
And how many do we have so far?
2, 4, 6, 8. There's 12,
so
I think.
This is 8, huh?
Yeah. When I was doing a postdoctoral fellowship, we published an article in the leading psychiatric journal, Archives of General Psychiatry, that more or less proved that this chemical imbalance theory of depression was false. And that was huge. It didn't get much referencing until about 10 years ago. But what we did, the chemical imbalance theory of depression was that depressed patients have a deficiency of brain serotonin. That's, and so that was, people wrongly thought that was a happiness chemical, which it is not. But what we did to test was a simple direct test. We gave people on our depression research unit in the VA hospital in Philadelphia, half of them flooded their brains with serotonin.
How did you do that?
Well, we gave them massive oral doses of L-tryptophan, the essential amino acid, and that goes with 10 grams or 20 grams. It was something 10 or 20 times the normal amount you get in the diet.
Yeah. And
that goes right from the stomach into the blood, diffuses into the brain, gets immediately synthesized into serotonin.
Okay.
And there was no effect whatsoever on their moods. So it was proof that if a deficiency of brain serotonin causes depression, then a massive increase in brain serotonin should cure depression, and it had no effect whatsoever. It was a double-blind study. It was well done. And then to make super certain of it, I bought, with one of my grant money, 2 pounds of pure L-tryptophan from the Ajinomoto Company of New York, Incorporated. That totally, perfectly pure L-tryptophan. And then I went to the hospital pharmacy, and they showed me how to work in these sterile conditions to dissolve it in half-normal saline at the maximum concentration possible from the laws of physics. And so I was able to get in a liter of half-normal saline 10 grams dissolved.
Yeah.
And then I gave it to veterans intravenously.
And that's a lot, right?
Oh, so usually you'd get 1 gram in 24 hours, and then I gave them all of that in 30 minutes intravenously, so maximum speed.
Yeah.
So they're getting like 100 or 500 times the normal dose, and it goes right into the bloodstream, right into the brain. To see, I'm really going to flood their brains with serotonin.
Yeah.
Had no effect on their mood. A lot of them fell asleep. It does cause sleepiness, but there were no mood elevating effects whatsoever. And that's one of the reasons I left biological psychiatry. I had a grant from the federal government to develop a brain serotonin research lab, stay on the faculty full time at Penn in the Department of Psychiatry. I said, I don't want to study brain serotonin anymore because it's never going to pay off. Yeah. And now finally, 40, 50 years later, people are acknowledging that isn't the cause of depression, and people are beginning to look in much more intelligent ways at neural circuitry and, other ways of looking at brain function. But I'm kind of proud of
L-tryptophan, what you get from ingesting your Thanksgiving turkey?
Yeah. It's an essential amino acid, and an essential amino acid means that your body cannot synthesize it.
Yeah, okay.
You have to get it in the diet.
Yeah.
And
I haven't heard that people were overly happy after a Thanksgiving dinner. They tend to be more sleepy.
Yeah, exactly. Another thing that I'm very, very proud of that I think is just huge and hopefully should change the whole field of psychology and psychiatry is testing. And at every session, I was probably the first person in the world to start testing, because way back in the 1970s, when I began treating people, I required them to take the Beck Depression Inventory between every session to monitor progress. And that was incredibly helpful to me. And then now we measure testing at the start and end of every single therapy session, so therapists can see for the first time how effective or ineffective they were. And also patients rate us at the end of every therapy session in the waiting room on empathy and helpfulness with very sensitive scales. That has been huge. It's a central piece of team therapy, and it's just massive, because I've done research that shows that therapist perceptions generally are not correct, how patients feel. Yeah. But if you have this before and end of session testing, you'll see how depressed people are, how effective the session is, how suicidal they are at the start and at the end, how empathic you were, and that has been a huge game changer and turns the practice of psychotherapy into the science of psychotherapy. It's the true integration of the scientist practitioner model, something that's talked about in graduate school but never implemented clinically. Yeah. And this allows you to have a data-driven form of therapy, and I believe this will also be the therapy of the future.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people now in the field have accepted that.
Two other quick ones. The positive reframing is a huge breakthrough technique to reduce resistance and rapidly speed up therapy. And I'm now seeing in my own clinical work, patients recover often in a single 2-hour therapy session, a complete elimination of symptoms. That's the other thing. When I was a resident, I didn't know it was possible. I hoped it would be, but I didn't know it would be possible to see super high speed recovery in patients. And now that's not 100% of the time, but I'm seeing that a lot of the time. And that comes about because of these paradoxical agenda setting techniques I've developed, as well as the very simple concept that I think therapy sessions should be always 2 hours long, that the 1-hour sessions are very, very limited. You can't get that much done in a 50-minute hour. But if you have a 2-hour session or 2.5-hour session, you can often complete most of the course of therapy. So anyway, those are the ones that popped into my head this morning, and I really appreciate a chance to mention this, and also for the record to say these are techniques that I created. Now, I say that because, very famous people have, I won't mention names, taken my list of 10 distortions, printed it in their own book with their own copyright under their name.
Yeah.
Pure plagiarism. And I guess plagiarism is, a highest form of praise or something like that, but it has bothered me sometimes when people, I don't have trouble giving credit, to other people when I refer to a technique that some back or someone else has created.
Yeah.
I like to credit them. Why not?
Yeah.
Why not do that? But anyway, these are the techniques that David Burns has created.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you. I think that, I hope this answers Tanuja's question, but I'm sure that many people would appreciate knowing, what your main workhorses are.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. It was fun being the center of attention here.
All right. Well, thank you, David. This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes for this podcast under the blog page, and where you can leave your comments and questions. The website has an abundance of resources for therapists as well as non-therapists, including books, workshops, a list of online training groups around the world, and much more. Theme music is Gypsy Jazz in Paris, 1935, composed and performed by Brett Van Donsel. I am your host, Fabrice Nye, and I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.